To set the stage for this video, I was looking through reviews of Fear and Hunger in order to see what the general consensus of the game was, and then I stumbled upon this video. This video was one of the worst videos he's ever made. I found it super frustrating. This video is bad. He's just so wrong about so many things about the game that it's genuinely frustrating to watch. And hopefully through my explanation of how some of these things work, you'll come to understand why. My goal with this video also is to show some of the good points of the game that other people might find frustrating, but when you look at it and when you observe the game more closely, you come to realize that the game is very solid, and I just wanted to refute some of the points in this video because it frustrated me, so let's get into it. The thing about Fear and Hunger that makes it so good is that you have to be paying attention and you have to gain more knowledge as you go through the runs. This aspect of his video is correct. He does mention this quite a bit, and it's probably the best part of the video, but everything else in it is just so bad. For example, he'll go over things like the Crow Mauler. The Crow Mauler is a difficult enemy, but there are many ways to avoid him. First of all, you can just run. To be fair to Super Eyepatch Wolf, he did pretty thoroughly go over some of the mechanics that are very frustrating about Crow Mauler, but there are ways to avoid him, and there are ways to very easily defeat him. Probably the best way to defeat him in a one-on-one battle is to poison him. It'll do 500 damage per turn. If you manage to last 2 turns after poisoning him, you win. The torso only has 1,200 health, or around there, on the highest difficulty. And so if you manage to live that long, which you probably can if you throw a red vial on the first turn, and then either have a companion, or just do it on the second turn, use one of the darts to poison him, it will sap his strength and you'll win. The only thing you really have to worry about is maybe getting your body broken by one of his mauls, since it is a guaranteed hit, but if you do cut off the arm before anything happens, then you should be golden for the fight. This fight becomes so easy that you could probably beat him without using a weapon. He is a very early game wall that you have to figure out how he works and figure out the ways to avoid him, but there are just ways to avoid him. He's not that difficult when you learn more about the game, and I feel like Super Eyepatch Wolf was not thorough enough with his findings. It's a very frustrating video to watch. One of the very first things that he gets wrong is how good some of the characters are, so let's go over it. Kahara, or the Mercenary, is a very strong character to start with. As a matter of fact, he is the strongest character, even in combat. He doesn't mention this, by the way. He just goes over the fact that he is pretty good in combat, but no, he's the best in combat by a substantial margin. So the reason for this is he has the ability On Guard. What On Guard does is he can attack on the first turn, and then he has another option on the second turn where you can just run. So what you do is you hold shift or your scale key, you go into combat with On Guard, and then you have a free attack, and then you have the ability to run away. You can do this with Crow Mauler, by the way. So he is then trivialized by the fact that you can just do this over and over again. It is a super powerful ability and easily one of the best ones in the game. He also has access to steal, and he has access to lockpicking. Lockpicking is good for obvious reasons. There's a lot of locked doors that you can, in fact, lockpick, so having this is very useful. And another reason why he's super good is because he has steal. Now, steal sounds like a very bad ability because in a lot of RPGs it is. But in this game, stealing from certain enemies gives you access to a bunch of items that are just straight up broken. For example, if you steal from the Torturer, which is a very early encounter, then you get access to the Vault Key. And what this key does is gives you access to the best armor in the game. So what you do afterwards is you steal the cell key, you get enough tinder boxes, which you should because there are mandatory tinder boxes around the dungeon, and you light them all in the same area that you found them in. And when you light all the torches, you can then go through the secret passage, go to the left, and you'll find an Iron Maiden. You use the key on the Iron Maiden and you will have access to an armor that gives you 50% resistance on all physical damage. This is very good. It is the best armor in the game, and the only one who has early access to this ability is Kahara if you have steel. Darcy is a character that is also very good, like he mentions in the video, but she's good for a very specific reason that he doesn't mention. Darcy has access to a move called Leg Sweep. Leg Sweep is an incredibly useful ability that breaks open every door in the game. That can be forced open anyway. For some reason in the game's code, Leg Sweep is an ability that kills it instantly because it counts as a leg, so voila, easy access to Miasma, one of the best swords in the game. And he just doesn't mention this in the video, probably because he didn't know. Now, to be fair to Super Eyepatch Wolf, he did mention that Enki was good because of necromancy, which is a pretty based take, but he's also good for another reason. Another reason why he's very good is because if you choose for him to be a disciple of the God of the Depths, you have access to another absolutely broken ability. This is Swarm of Locusts. Swarm of Locusts gives you a spell that targets the entire body, and it targets each body part. If this hits, the enemy is stunned for 1 or 2 turns, and that body part cannot attack before this runs out. What this means is that a lot of even endgame bosses are trivialized by this ability, and it's just good. And if he knew about this, or if he did more research than he did for this video, then he would have known this. But he just didn't. He didn't mention that. He didn't even talk about like the gods and the affinities and that whole system, which, although obscured to be fair, if you even intuit like, oh, why can I pray at this thing? Maybe there's something more to this. Maybe I should look it up, or something along those lines. And you don't even have to look it up either. It's like, oh, I did this thing. Let me go back to the hexen table. Oh, I gained an affinity. Or, oh, the circle on the thing got bigger. Now I can unlock these abilities. How strange. You can intuit some of this stuff, and he just doesn't. And in the video, he says that Ragnvaldr is the best character in the game, which is ludicrous. He is not. He's probably one of the worst characters in the game, in fact, because although he does have a attack bonus, which is very good, he also has the worst start-off abilities. Devour is not a good ability because you will always be getting food if you know what you're doing in this game. You will never have to devour corpses, and also if you devour a corpse in the game, then before you loot them, then you lose access to all the things you can search on an enemy, which is just bad. I've come across several occasions playing Ragnvaldr where when I was trying to loot the enemy, I clicked the button too fast and then you devour the corpse. And what this does is you eat the items on him as well, which means that you then lose access to the item. And so I would say Devour is a very bad ability. But in the video, he's like, oh yeah, it's one of the best abilities in the game. It's like, no, bro. Ragnvaldr's bad. And he also has Bloodlust, which is essentially useless. And then he has the only good ability that he has, which is Marksmanship, which he also doesn't mention in the video. Kills enemies with 1 hit. And you can also kill guards, or basically any enemy that you can see and get into combat with on the overworld. As long as they don't have a helmet, you can kill it with a bow and arrow. And you can get bow and arrows very easily later on. And he doesn't even mention stuff like the Pinecone Pig and like a lot of the really good items in the game that very easily mitigates a lot of the difficulty. But I mean, maybe he didn't find them. One of the best items in the game is the White Angel Soul. The White Angel Soul is one that gives you an extra turn at the end of the combat round. What this means is you get an extra attack, and if you have a companion like, say, Moonless, she also has an extra attack. What this means is that you get 2 extra attacks, and you can do this by killing one of the White Angel enemies and having a Soul Stone, using it on that enemy and getting an accessory. This is one of the best items in the game that is a near end game item, that most people should pick up, and if they had a soul stone, then they should be like using it and figuring this stuff out, but he doesn't even mention that in the video. Another thing that he gets very wrong in this video is his claim that hitting the head is always the best option. It is not. The reason for this is that the head has a different equation for, well, evasion. Every body part has around a 90% chance to hit unless you have a weapon like bone shears, which decreases this chance. This can be mitigated by having the monocle or eyeglasses, but in general you have around a 90% chance to hit body parts, so you'll very rarely be missing, whereas the head has a very different equation for that to happen. It is a much lower chance, and to go for the head is a very dumb idea in most cases. An addendum to this video, I would like to mention that the exact equation for hit chance is the hit rate parentheses 1 minus point whatever the evasion stat is, and then you end the parentheses. And the reason why I bring this up is because the head, you have to roll this chance twice. So hitting the head in general is a bad idea. This can be mitigated with magic. The spell hit chance overwrites the attack hit chance, and the attack hit chance for spells is always 70%, and you only have to roll it once. So with that in mind, if you want to go for the head, use Black Orb, which attacks 3 times. So you have 3 rolls of 70% chance to hit. And what this does is allows you to mitigate enemies that are particularly hard to hit in the head if you want to go for that strategy. And another great thing about this game is that there's many different strategies to beat different enemies because they all have different evasion stats and different general ways to attack and turn orders. So playing around with this kind of stuff is very fun, and it's one of the strong suits of the game, in my opinion. And for the record, the head always has a higher evasion stat than every single body part, which means that although every body part has around a 95 to a 97% chance of being hit, the head is much less likely, and it depends on what enemy you're fighting. Some heads have around 80% chance to be hit, others have 90. Other heads have about a 40% or less. So when you are rolling for this, you have to keep this in mind. Also, monocles and spectacles do not work very well with the head because the equation for them is different. So for some reason in the game's code, this overwrites it, even though the monocle gives about a 20% increase of hit rate and the spectacles give an 80% chance of hit rate, and this just doesn't apply to head hits. So they're very useless in the situation where you're trying to hit with the head, and they also don't apply to spells, so it's just kind of useless, which is very important to know when you're playing this game. Addendum over. What you generally want to do instead is go for the body parts that attack. You take them out, and then what the enemy will do then is do a attack called tackle, where they'll flail about and do far less damage. At this point, you'll just want to go for the torso, and by hitting the torso enough, you'll kill the enemy. It's just a better way to defeat enemies as a whole. It's a lot safer and will generally improve your time. And he doesn't mention that in the video. Also, one of the most prominent ways that enemies attack is through turn orders. So in the video, he mentions that all the body parts attack at once. This is not the case. With some enemies, of course, there's exceptions. But in general, let's take a guard. A guard on the first turn will use slash. He won't use the other hand, and he won't use the stinger. On the second turn, he will use his charge attack and his slash attack if he still has it. On the third turn, if he still has all his body parts, he will slash, he will use his arm, and he will use the stinger most likely. There's a chance that it won't attack as well, but in general, this is how the turn order goes. What you can do to mitigate this or remove this threat entirely is by cutting off the slashing arm, and then you run away. When you then go back into combat, he will then try to attack. He has no arm. So what you do then is take out the charging arm, or even better yet, just go for the torso. This then can be repeated. So you attack the torso, then you run away, then you go back in, attack the torso, run away, until he dies. And all the enemies work like this, by the way. They all have a attack pattern and an attack order. And just by exploiting this, the game is suddenly a lot easier. You just have to know what the attack patterns are. And so when he says, oh yeah, you just need to avoid all the battles. No, you don't have to. Just learn them and you'll be fine. This because this is the this is the Dark Souls of RPGs in a sense, where you have to know the attack patterns in order to get good. So if you do this, you'll have a fine time with the game. I don't understand his desire to avoid every single combat encounter. It's not necessary. Another thing he doesn't mention in the video are the quests that you can do. Maybe you didn't talk to enough of the NPCs, but in general, if you do some of the quests, you'll have a lot easier time. For example, if you're not Enki, then doing the God of the Depths quest line is very useful to do. You can do this by finding the Cockroach King in the tree and doing his quest line. This requires you to kill Enki, and of course you can't do this quest if you're Enki. So you find Enki on the 7th floor of the dungeon, you kill him, you come back, and you'll have affinity. There's more to the quest than this, obviously, but having this God's affinity is very good because you have access to Locust Swarm, like I previously mentioned. And you also have access to the attack that he was so worried about with the Crow Mauler. You have access to Flock of Crows, which, by the way, should be Murder of Crows. It's a shame. With this ability, you get a spell that will blind the enemy. It has a high chance of blinding too, so with this, enemies will just miss. Also, one of the best abilities in the game, and you get it by doing this quest line. Also, a hint for those who want to play the game and they're just having a very hard time with it, there are several exploits in the game that you can take full advantage of. One of the better ones in the game is these two tiles on the map. What you can do in the very beginning of the game, right from the start, is if you go here and then just click A or whatever button is your confirm button, you can just have infinite light blue vials which heal you full health. You get infinite clothes fragments, you get infinite sticks, you get infinite torches, and you also get infinite curse short swords. This helps a lot if you're having a hard time and maybe you had bad RNG, and this is a great way to mitigate that. Now, this is definitely a debug menu thing that Orange, the dev of the game, probably left in, but it helps a lot to know these sorts of things. There's also this spot on the very first tile set where if you go here and click the confirm button again, you will have immediate access to Darcy and Ragnvalder. With this, you just have 3 party members now. This even works on hard mode where you're not supposed to have any. You also can have access to the infinite lucky coin glitch. So what this is if you go to the tree and you stick to this first floor of the tree, if you haven't gone to the village and gotten this particular lucky coin, then you can infinitely get a lucky coin in this spot. And he also doesn't mention that those slash attacks that take off your limbs, you can just guard and they won't do that anymore. If you have some companions that you don't want that to happen to. And he also doesn't mention like leg guards or arm guards, which are accessories that also prevent that. There's a lot of information missing in the Super Eyepatch Wolf video that is infinitely frustrating because there's so many ways to mitigate things if you just look around and try hard enough to find out other ways to get around certain mechanics. The only part I may agree with is that the end game is very difficult. Some of those end game bosses are ridiculously hard unless you have just straight up cheat items like Blue Sin, or if you have these spells like Locust Swarm. So I'll give him that, but in general, before that point, there's a lot of ways to mitigate bad RNG, and it's not as bad as people think it is, as long as you are always trying to figure out more information on each run. And also another thing he doesn't mention is that on the first floor, if you clear out all the enemies, then you'll have a very easy access save. the whole save system where, like, obviously there's a 50-50 coin flip where if you don't do it correctly, then an enemy will show up. But if you killed all the enemies on the floor, then suddenly you don't have to worry about the 50-50 coin flip, because even if you fail, it'll just be like, oh, you were spooked. And then so what you do is if you failed it, there's no enemy you'll encounter. You just have to leave the area and then come back and then try the save again. It's not that bad. Like I said, a lot of ways to mitigate bad RNG, but he doesn't mention them in the video. He's just bad at the game. That's the only conclusion that I came to when I finished watching his video. He's just bad at the game, and he's kind of mean-spirited towards it. But what do I know?